Hello, my name is Jennifer Kretschmer. I am a writer, performer, streamer, TV producer, all sorts of fun things. I'm one of the authors of Candlekeep Mysteries for D&D. I am on Heroes of the Plains for Demiplane. I'm the creator of the Accessibility and Gaming Resource Guide. I'm a disability consultant. I'm currently working for Skybound Games on the Walking Dead franchise, among other projects. And I am so excited to have you here today for the Dungeons and Dragons panel, the obligatory and wonderful Dungeons and Dragons panel. We have a phenomenal lineup of panelists, so we're going to go around and chat with all of them. I have been playing D&D for 20 years, DMing for almost as many, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this game that I love so much with all of these amazing people.
Hi, I'm Trent Oster. I'm the CEO of Beamdog. I've been playing D&D since I was 12, and a friend of mine showed up, and we didn't have dice. We had Yahtzee dice, and we just got started by rolling dice, and he was telling the story, and it just seemed like the most amazing thing ever. And that actually screwed up the entire rest of my life because I couldn't really do anything else after that, and I wound up co-founding a company called BioWare way back in the day. Uh, we managed to grow it up fairly large. I think it was 420 people when I left. And then I founded my own studio, Beamdog, and we actually reacquired the rights to a lot of the early titles we had worked on previously. Baldur's Gate, Baldur's Gate 2 as well, some of the additional Black Isle titles, Planescape Torment, Icewind Dale. And we went through and enhanced them and ported them literally to every platform known to man. If it has a screen and it's not a fridge, you can probably play a Baldur's Gate on it. So we're pretty happy with how it's turned out. They're fun products. They're great games. It's a great storyline. I'm really happy to see the Lyrian group continuing forward on that. I think they're going to do amazing work. And when I'm not busy doing game development, I'm a blacksmith.
Oh, cool.
That is really cool.
We
Okay,
make
I
a
don't.
panel about that. Can we talk about blacksmithing?
Yeah, for sure.
The
Don't get me
obligatory
started.
blacksmithing panel?
Don't get me started.
That's very cool.
My name is Violet. Oh, sorry. My name is Violet Furman. I am the D&D Adventures Lead consultant for Fantasy Grounds, which is a virtual tabletop that enables people to play D&D together online. I'm using it right now to connect with some of my players who are all over. One of them moved several states away. I also am a local game event organizer. So I've helped out at local conventions here, hosted for several years a reoccurring game day at a local store as well. That was the highlight, I think, of when I started playing D&D with the community was that event. So I was really happy to take it over. Um, I love games. I don't know. I have been playing tabletop RPGs for probably 10 years. Um, and I'm probably not gonna ever stop.
Great. I think it's B. Yeah, my name's Kieran Kelly. I'm the product manager for Larian Studios. I've worked on original film 1 and 2, Divinity original film 1 and 2. And as Trent mentioned, that we're now working on Baldur's Gate 3, which we're obviously incredibly excited about. The whole team is involved in, and we're currently literally about to release our next pack actually as we record this. So yeah, I'm also one of the main project leads for the board game that we're working on. I've got a huge tabletop heart of as much board game investment in games as I do in video games. And yeah, I mean, D&D for me is such an important game, both on just a game dev level, on a design level. It's influenced a huge amount of my upbringing. It's a huge part of my social life even now. And yeah, it's been a big part of my life through multiple iterations and editions of the game.
I'm Sarah, disabled game designer for tabletop games, a writer as well, and disability consultant. I work predominantly at the moment with Artelsorian Games on their Witcher tabletop game and also for Cyberpunk with the new Cyberpunk Red. And I've done bits and pieces across the tabletop sphere. And I also made the homebrew combat wheelchair for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Fantastic. And you can find links to more about all of our panelists in the event description. So check out everyone's work there. So let's start out with talking about what is D&D. Why is D&D the game that people think of when they think of tabletop? You know, we're now what 47 years after D&D first was published. Why are people not only talking about D&D and continuing to play it, but why is it more popular than ever? Like what is it about this game that resonates with people so strongly?
Well, I guess I'll start. I guess when I think about D&D, and I think a lot of people lump D&D and just general tabletop RPGs. Like I've heard people when they're referring to a different system say we're still playing like D&D. That's kind of how I started. I didn't actually start with D&D. I started with Pathfinder. And for me, it's just really about forming strong bonds with a group of people and being able to share a story together. It's communal. I think I read or heard someone say it's kind of like telling a story around a fireplace. There's something that kind of brings everyone together. And most of my friends that I've made in here in LA when I moved is because of D&D. And so it's been for me basically the main way to connect with people.
I like the idea of synecdoche, like synecdoche, like the piece of the whole that we call everything. Everything, I mean, and there is something to that we call all sorts of tabletop D&D, that sort of is the go-to. Um, is there something specific about D&D as a system, as a world, as a concept that makes it the thing that resonates? Is it um
I think D&D, a big part of what it is it's just a conceptual framework within which you can hang whatever you want. And I think it's that combination of enough structure to build off of without dictating exactly what you have to do. Like you've got this concept of characters and statistics and it's this massive framework that can contain everything. Like when I was a kid and I started discovering D&D and I started getting access to books and I was like, oh, player's handbook, monster manual. When I got deities and demigods, I was like, oh my god, it's Thor and a hammer and oh, that is so awesome.
but which edition of deities and demigods?
One of the first editions, like the one of the first printings of it was it actually hit my game store and I picked up I think one of the first editions that actually hit the shelves. I was pretty hardcore back then. It was like I had money for very few things, but D&D books was definitely among the lead. But I really think that's the strength is it's that framework. It allows and it supports, but it doesn't dictate.
To me, this has been something that obviously we're coming up on close to 50 years of this game system. Um, there is something about it that is really connecting with audiences today and players today. I think some of it is this rediscovery of having internet media allowing people to connect over distance and what we've had in the last couple of years in terms of needing to find new things to do that are you can do remotely that allow actual interpersonal connection. I think there's also something to the idea of something that doesn't need tech too, in some ways. But you know, I think D&D. There were some things that are interesting about how it looks today versus how it looked back when it started. Obviously, we've gone through a number of different editions. We're now on 5th edition. They've talked about that 5.5 is in the works now. That's coming in 2024. What does it look like today? I mean, a few things that I can point to are some of the things that I've been working on. You know, my adventure for Candlekeep Mysteries was Candlekeep Mysteries, as far as I know, was one of the first books to have multiple disabled authors on it, openly disabled authors. My adventure was the first adventure designed with accessibility in mind for player characters. there's a huge growth of new authors and diverse authors coming in to write for D&D. Adventurers League is changing. You know, what is different today in the community, in the way that we play the game, that's helping this happen?
I don't want to like hog the mic, but I can speak from my own experience about why I'm playing 5th edition and other games. And it kind of goes back 10 years or so. When I started, I was, hearing about this game D&D, and I didn't know anything. And if you were happened to sit in my first game that I ran, because I started off running, I probably did not follow any of the rules because I didn't quite understand all of them, but we had a good time. But when I was looking at what system to pick up, that was in my mind again, all of it's D&D. I remember looking at some of the 3.5 books. I think 4th edition was also out around that time, and I didn't really resonate with what was in the books as far as how the people looked. And then for me, I ended up starting with Pathfinder, I think specifically because their paladin is a dark-skinned black woman with cornrows. And I was just like, whoa, that's that's cool. So I started with that system, but I think nowadays if you open up a D&D book either to read or look at the images, um I like to believe, and I think it can still improve more, but more people can see themselves in um being represented in the books, and that really matters and makes a big difference. And I don't think it can be understated. And so the work that you and Sarah are doing is like amazing because it's important. And the more and more I think people can feel like they can be a part of this, the more it'll continue to grow.
And to me, I think a big part of the growth of D&D and the reason it's resonating with the audience now is everybody was getting really sick of overly scripted s- kind of entertainment. And this idea of watching people actually who are really enthusiastic and who are having fun and who are interacting together, that that's a magical mix. And that's great. And it's really actually even hard to engineer that level of performance out of scripted actors when they're interacting. Whereas if you get a bunch of charismatic people, you stick them together, you give them a storyline to go off on, and and everybody brings their weird things to D&D. Everybody's like, I have a character that has this bizarro critical flaw that will always screw up everything that the party tries to do. And then they play that to the max and they just roll with it and have fun. And it's so engaging and it's so entertaining. And ultimately, I think that is the driver right now of the streaming success of D&D is enthusiasm and fun. And it's authentic, it's real. Nobody's faking it, nobody's scripting it. It's going and it's happening. And I think people just connect with that and they feel that enthusiasm coming through. And as you mentioned, the more diverse the audience becomes, the more we open it up to more cultures and more races and disabled people. You're bringing more people to that party and opening up new options for people to do their own crazy thing that they bring to D&D. Because I've been on campaigns and it got downright silly. And it's fun. It's what part of the game. If you're not being silly and there aren't moments where the entire party is on the floor laughing so hard that they can't breathe, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, and I think there's something to also that a generation that really was kind of raised on video games, um, and is used to there being some sort of walls at some point in the stories that you get to explore. Running up as a DM, especially one of my favorite moments is watching new players who are playing tabletop games for the first time, have the moment where it clicks that they can like knock the wall over and go, oh, there's no wall there. And then you watch them sort of run around the world, just breaking everything they can. And you're going, yeah, you can do that. Yeah, yes, you can. Yes, that can happen. Go, please, go be free. And that's just such a different experience, I think, for people who are used to having these boundaries on stories. And that's not those stories have great value too. It's just different stories for different moments, I think.
I think for me, personal stories are where it's at, right? So having a defined rule set, a defined frame, like Trent said earlier, is everything. And it's now more approachable than ever. Fifth edition is easier to get into than ever, be it digital or physical. The rule set is a lovely mix between fourth and third to a certain degree in terms of it's still got that level of depth and complexity if you want, but it's really easy to get into and learn. Um, for me, it's all about telling the stories and having a rule set that everyone can just jump into. And it's kind of like having rule set that you had growing up on the street with your friends on the in the area. You could move to a different area and you might have a similar game there that you can then apply that your previous experience into that. And so having that shared framework to tell those stories with is huge, and it allows people to express themselves more. It allows themselves to be themselves more. They don't feel like they have to fit to a societal constraint or historic thing. It's just you be yourself. You tell the story you want to do. You play the game you want to play, and that's I think one of the greatest strengths of where D&D has been. Not even just I think where the community is growing. It's where us as players are growing because it's we're connecting with who we want to connect with and telling the stories we want to tell.
Mhm. And Violet, to your point about not knowing all of the rules when you started, I do want to point out that in the introduction to the player's handbook, it specifically says you don't need to know all of the rules to play D&D right. That it's about the stories and it's about the connections with people. So you were doing it right from day one.
Thank you.
A DM is the golden rule anyway. So if you're a DM,
Mhm.
it's your game no matter what.
Yep, 100%. And I think Kieran, what you're saying is a perfect way to sort of lead into talking about the accessibility of D&D. You know, Sarah and I both do a lot of work in writing and design in terms of the tabletop accessibility sphere. I have the accessibility and gaming resource guide and the disabled pros in tabletop directory now. And Sarah, you created the combat wheelchair, which just had its third edition come out. We both deal with shall we say resistance to the idea of disabled adventurers and characters in fantasy worlds. Can you talk a little bit about the combat wheelchair and your design process, and
Yeah.
why representation and disability in fantasy worlds is so important?
Um, well, Combat Wheelchair was a project that kind of came up through friends who were also disabled, some of them wheelchair users. I myself am ambulatory and use my wheelchair whenever I, need it. And uh, well, we was playing D&D with them, and one made a passing comment of, "Oh, it'd be really cool if I could just use my wheelchair to like run someone over." And I was like, you know what? I could make that happen. I could give it a go. I'd only really kind of been making magic items for like myself and my groups that I was playing with and such at the time. And I was like, I'll give it a go. And like it started out as literally just 3 rules. It was like 3 actions you could take. And then I was like, oh no, I need to think about it more. And, kind of got into teaching myself about um, the like murder ball, like wheelchair rugby and wheelchair basketball, and it's called murder ball for a reason. High impact, hold nothing back, and the chairs are designed to withstand really heavy hits, and the person can get back up again. Um, and the way the chair's designed and everything. And I was like, well, okay, then this was kind of the chair that an adventurer would have because it makes sense. It's stabilized. Everything to do with it is to take knocks and be lightweight and everything else that comes with, wheelchair sports. And I decided this in like my final year of university. So I was doing my I was doing my dissertation on like weekdays, and the weekends was I was going to the university library and taking out resources on wheelchairs. And a great thing about university is they don't question it if you just go in and take something. So I was just taking loads of like wheelchair sports documents and things and just like giving no context to anyone about why I was taking them. And yeah, I kind of just, taught myself, then had like a small group of people where I gave it out to them, was like, hey, could you try it in your games and let me know? And yeah, it kind of just continued growing and growing. And it was not just the chair anymore, it was the chair, and you can upgrade it if you want to at certain points if you have the money and certain prerequisites for like any spellcasters or anything. And then it was like, okay, well, what if I made a background for it? So I made the Paralympian background. And then I was like, okay, well, what if I made a subclass for it that goes in with the classes? And then I ended up making a subclass for every class, including Matthew Mercer's own homebrew class of Blood Hunter. And then I also made my own D&D class, which was based on Polish folklore and The Witcher, unsurprisingly, because I love The Witcher. And yeah, that kind of inspired that, and it's become this whole big thing now. And there are miniatures for it where the money, it basically only goes into printing them, and the rest goes to charity. It goes to the Ayla's Danlos Support and Awareness UK charity. And the PDF as it is now, all the artwork and everything is by disabled artists. They were the only people I hired to work on it. And yeah, so it's kind of grown into this really big thing. And the resistance, like you said, I think it is met from what we perceive a a good hero to be, or like the best kind of hero in fantasy. Often, disabled people are usually waysided to villain roles, with disability being like, a symbolism for their kind of corruption, quote unquote, or a motivator for them to be a bad
Narrative
person.
prosthesis.
Yeah. Darth Vader is an excellent example of that. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, so things like that. And I think that's why we meet a lot of resistance, is it's just so ingrained of what the perfect hero should be, that they should be able-bodied. And if they do have any physical or mental disabilities, they're supposed to be these challenges to overcome rather than accepting them as they are. To the point where like it very much proves that mindset when I talked about Geralt of Rivia in the books. He is disabled, witches are disabled. And I put down all the evidence and everything, and people were like, no, he's not disabled. And I'm like, he is, and you just don't want to accept it. It's the thing. Because it somehow takes away some value from Geralt as this very strong, independent character. To say he's disabled is somehow a bad thing and reflects badly on him.
Well,
When,
and people
they
tend to
were,
be
yeah,
very good with people are okay with people wearing glasses and using that
yeah,
accessibility device in
yeah,
their fantasy worlds,
and
or having pirates who are
yeah,
amputees, but not definitely not any adventurer, because an
yeah,
adventurer could
it's that
yeah.
kind of, disability is okay when it's aesthetically pleasing,
Mhm,
but not when it's, just as it is. It
mhm.
has to look fantastical. It has to look, really cool or badass, and that's like the only kind that is acceptable to a lot of these people.
And it
Um,
has to be earned. It
yeah,
can't
yeah.
just be
Like
yeah.
like, people were like, "Oh, well, why didn't you make the combat wheelchair a magical item?" And I was like, "Doesn't need to be a magical item, it just needs to be practical."
Yeah.
The only magic for it is just for it to get up and down stairs, and even that's very low level magic. Um, and yeah, like, that kind of resistance of, yeah, like, it has to look fantastical and amazing, otherwise it's not worthwhile, or it, shouldn't be for the character, and it doesn't fit in the setting, that kind of
So
argument.
what specifically about that representation do you think is so essential? Why do you think it's so key that we include representation of disability and accessibility, but also other marginalized groups in fantasy worlds?
It's that, opening a book and just wanting to see yourself and be presented in a positive light,
Mhm.
rather than having some negative connotation about it, or, that it somehow reflects badly on the character. It's great, like, because I really do love Curse of Strahd, even with like its problems and things. I love horror, and ableism is ingrained in horror. Um, and it's still hurtful even now to like look at the old version of sorry,
Esmeralda.
Esmeralda, yeah. And the artwork for her is beautiful, and you can see the prosthetic, but then it says that it's a secret and she hides it because it's shameful. That got corrected, but even then, you still have the visual representation of mongrel folk and the connotations that come with that, and it's still really impactful. And people who aren't disabled don't see that and don't understand that that kind of thing is hurtful. So going forward, like having representation, um, that either, addresses and handles these topics or, shows disability in a positive light or in, just the light that it is, which is it just is, disability just is, you know, is really important because, everyone should be able to open a book and see themselves. And anybody, who says that they've made a character that has no element of themselves in it is a liar. Everyone puts something about themselves in a character, whether they realize it or not.
Yep.
Because you want to have something you relate to, because usually that's the jumping point for you improvising and role playing that character. And I deeply connect to a character who's disabled rather than a character who's able-bodied. So yeah, like, having that kind of point to, you can't separate yourself from your character. I'm not saying that, people can't. It's just, you want to have something that you relate to with them. And that affects how they interact with the world and how you as a player interact with it as well.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
can I add on to something
Please.
that Sarah said earlier? When I think about representation, because I think um, you modeled exactly how to implement it as far as an organization, like who you chose to hire to be part of what you produced. Um, I think it's important to remember and acknowledge that representation, it shouldn't be coming just from people who are not part of the different groups you're representing. And I think it's there we're still kind of in a place where you want to see it in the book, but I also want to see it if I open the writer's room. And I
Yes.
want to see it if I look at your artists. And I think that's still kind of where there's probably some struggle. I think it's getting better.
Mhm.
But it needs to be both. It has to me it's more genuine to make sure that you are representing people in both spheres and not just on the external what other people see.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
think it's important to note too that it has to be at all levels because there are things that are subtle nuances that go into material that an editor who isn't aware of that may miss and make changes that end up being harmful or problematic or so it needs to be a systemic change for sure. I will note that we now have Mackenzie de Armas on the disability front. Mackenzie de Armas is now a full-time designer at Wizards of the Coast, which is amazing. And Mackenzie is also multiply marginalized, so she's really there, kind of adding another voice to that room, which is so wonderful. And she's also one of the most brilliant designers I've ever met, which is really exciting. But I think there's some very exciting stuff happening. I mean, at a number of studios, I think we are finally getting much better at recognizing that we need people all throughout the process. Um, it's so important um, to get authentic voices in the room for those things. So one other important accessibility issue that's been highlighted this year, particularly in with everything going on in the world, is the need for players to connect remotely, which is an access need in so many ways. But it's one of the things that has been keeping D&D and other tabletop games relevant over the decades has been recently have been the tools that have been developed to bridge kind of the physical and virtual play. So Violet, can you talk a little bit about how Fantasy Grounds came about and became a tool for players to bring their game into a digital sphere?
Definitely. So Fantasy Grounds was purchased after using it for a year by Doug Davison. He's the president of Smiteworks. He used the software, was a gamer, liked it, and so purchased it and has been leading it with John Gregory ever since. Um, they have made a concerted effort to reach out to different publishers, um, both like, the bigger ones, see, but also indie publishers, and try to make their platform one so that it's easy for players to kind of get to the playing and not have to worry about how do I get this content into this VTT. And so now I think there's like several thousands of like different content products from different publishers. And yeah, they've just done a lot of work to try and really make it accessible and easy, both for the players to benefit as far as not having to worry about how to get the content in, but also for publishers and creators to also have a space to another space to present their product. So I can say personally, before I was hired as the consultant at Fantasy Grounds, I actually, because I don't think VTTs necessarily have to just only be virtual. I think that's where their strength is. But for me, I think I've started using it in the physical space first. I'm a person who has a lot of trouble focusing sometimes if I don't have visual representations. And so for me as a DM, it was always really important. Like I had to have a map, and it cannot be, because I don't draw well, cannot be something I draw. It needs to be something pretty. And so I remember like purchasing like a large format printer from my home and putting together, I think I put together Amber Temple, like cutting and pasting, and that took a long time. That's not something I recommend. um and eventually I was like, there has to be a different way to do this. And so I saw some people starting to use TV tables, and I was like, I want one I can bring to conventions. And so I had one built, and I decided to use Fantasy Grounds to be what powers it. And since it can be run online or off, I can take it with me to conventions. And so it's easy for me to present images of different content, or if I want to be able to easily see like what's coming up next, I have it right there in front of my screen. Another one is sometimes I'm there's a lot of times where I'm just tired and I want to play D&D, but I don't really want to do the math in real life or online. And so I will just bring my computer and as a DM roll the dice in the program and have my stat block. So I can just click on it and it rolls it. So I can focus on the other parts, because it might be that I have the brain power to like do stories and like, enjoy everyone's company, but I'm just kind of zapped as far as that. And so um, I think when I think about VTTs and Fantasy Grounds, I think about it in both ways. How can it help you online connect with people and make the running of the game smoother, but also how can it help people offline enhance their physical games?
That's awesome. It's so wonderful to see the way technology is enhancing physical games and also allowing people to connect um, over space. And now that we're kind of in the digital realm, let's talk about how video games have transformed classic D&D situations and settings and locations like Neverwinter Nights and Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale and Planescape Torment into these really beloved classics. So Trent, Beamdog's been bringing these titles, some of which are more than 20 years old, back to life for modern players. What do you think it is about these games that's allowed them to persist and driving the appetite more than 2 decades later for these stories about these canonical Forgotten Realms settings and
I think,
Planescape?
yeah, well, I can speak with authority around Baldur's Gate because I was there when it was being created. I was in conversations, and my business partner Cam Topher, his pen and paper character was Minsk. All of the pen and paper characters in Baldur's Gate, the vast majority of them actually came from a pen and paper campaign that his group ran when they were in high school. So
Oh my
he
God.
had Minsk, his girlfriend, her character was Shartil. One of the players in the group actually had Saravok as his player character. and Edwin was one of the player characters, and that's why they're authentic. That's why they're interesting. That's why those characters have such depth, is because this was teenagers projecting themselves into these characters and introducing those ridiculous things that they did, which created these characters that just they went in directions other characters hadn't. And I think the fun thing about Baldur's Gate specifically is it's a story that you can connect with from a fantasy perspective, but at the same time, it makes sense from trying to start a trade war. It's essentially a political story, and there's lots of backstabbing and intrigue that goes along with it. So it's both serious but whimsical at the same time. Like there's characters that you meet on one map, which are Larry, Daryl, and Daryl, which is from the Bob Newhart show. And that's just something that one of the designers snuck in because they loved it. They thought it was hilarious, and it was. And in some cases, characters made it in because of bugs. Like we had a character called Biff the Understudy. So in the game, if you have a conversation with two other characters and one of them is somehow killed, Biff the Understudy will appear and take their place. And he will speak their lines as if he is that character. And if you do it right, you could actually recruit Biff to your party. And Biff the Understudy is entirely below average in all stats. So he's not a good pick, but
Which
it's
feels so
there.
authentic to a game where your character dies and you're like, fine, here's my backup.
Yeah.
This is what I've got ready to go. So it's you think that it's the translation of the real world game elements that then were brought into a new format
And
that's what connects.
it was made by people who really loved the pen and paper game. Like on a
Yeah.
fundamental level, they connected with it. They knew what they loved about the game and they knew what they wanted to bring to the audience. And that's what they delivered. And in some cases, it's a straight up story of a hero doing the heroic thing and your godfather being murdered and you on this kind of revenge, but also for the good of the land. And then in some ways, it's the story of a crazy mage and his thief partner and just madness all around. There's moments that just you get into it and it's hilarious and you enjoy it so much. And I think a large part of it as well, second edition D&D wasn't the most intuitive rule set to jump into. So THACO, the fact that to hit armor class 0 is a roll, and instead of going kind of up, it goes, THACO gets better, AC gets better as it goes down. So it didn't make a ton of intuitive sense. So I was really happy when we were working on Neverwinter Nights, we were actually a beta tester for third edition, and
Oh
they sent
wow.
us third edition design documents in like PDF form, and we were like, "Oh my god, this is so much more sensible," and it was
It's a
wonderful.
big change between second and third edition,
Uh,
like that losing Thaco. Did you see there is a Thaco Easter egg in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, the newest book that came out. It's a fun
just
one.
just got to call it out.
Yeah.
But I guess that was one of my highlight moments in my entire career was when they announced third edition Dungeons and Dragons. We were actually on the stage announcing Neverwinter Nights at the same time, so we were part of that announcement. So it was like an auditorium of like 1,500 people, and they're announcing third edition, and James and I are out there on a couch, and we're talking about D&D, and we're talking about Neverwinter Nights and how it's all going to merge together, and what we loved about third edition, and it was just so much fun and so entertaining, and I think part of that as well, like with the complexity of second edition D&D, the computer really helped with that.
Yeah,
But then I think
absolutely.
if you look at pen and paper when you're playing a combat, that's an hour, 2-hour session. On a PC, if you don't pause, that's about 12 seconds.
Yep.
It just goes like that. So the speed at which you can go through things on a computer is so much greater than on traditional tabletop game,
Yeah.
especially resolving combat, unless your DM's really fast forwarding combat. And I know a lot of DMs who do that. It's like, oh, let's just rock, paper, scissors this combat. We'll blast through it. And let's get back to the fun bits, which is the story bits. And I
Yeah.
think computers do a really good job of taking the abstract nature of the combat, and by compressing it in terms of limiting the rules on what you can do, really streamlines the experience, because computers are really good at modeling very limited systems.
Yeah.
So pen and paper, you can be like, I jump off the wall and I punch the orc in the face, and then I stab him in the butt. Whereas in Baldur's Gate, you can't do that. You're like, I hit the orc.
I
And
hit it with my axe.
yeah, you either hit him with your axe or you hit him with your fist. If you hit him with your fist, he might get knocked unconscious, but it's doing way less damage, so you could probably just hit him with the axe.
Yeah.
It's a better
So
idea.
that's kind of talking about the earlier Baldur's Gates. Now let's talk, Kieran, about Baldur's Gate 3, which looks just phenomenal. It's so cool. How did Larian join the party to create this third installment of Baldur's Gate?
Well, it's a long list of Sven and pestering and poking and hoping and asking. But no, I think without joking about it or just going into it, like really, it was our original Sin 2 that really showed, I guess. It was a accumulation of so many ideas that we had come as
Mhm.
a team, and how far we had come as a team in terms of creating systems that layer together, that allowed you to play in, while we were still able to tell you that traditional role-playing adventure story. So DOS 2 was able to do that, and I think that was probably one of the main reasons why Wizards eventually was like, yeah, you know what, I think you guys can, we can do this. And so there was multiple conversations, I'm sure multiple different legal conversations and conversations between various lawyers and different things. But honestly, at the end of it, then it ended up being a team of us going over to Seattle, multiple meetings and kind of long design meetings, literally sitting with the teams and going, what would we do? And I remember, I unfortunately didn't get to participate in quite a few of those, but like the general sense of that was they were basically brainstorming a D&D adventure is all they were ended up being, and making sure that everyone was on the same page in terms of what we wanted to achieve. And I have to say, the relationship with Wizards, as we've been developing BG3, has been that it's been very much, you guys are designing an adventure. Just you're continuing a story, but you're very much DMs and adventure creators for this type of thing. And it's interesting, as Trent is saying, that like for us, systems are obviously a big thing. Video games can do a lot in terms of storytelling. Um, I'm very close to finishing a 2-year campaign where we've gone from level 2 to level 20, and
Oh
that's
wow.
weekly gameplay. It took us a very long time to play, but in a video game, you'll get through that in what, 50, 60 hours, depending on how the game is scaled and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
it's definitely different telling a story through that. And you have people's attention a lot tighter because you've got journals and you've got way, and you're expecting them to consume a lot of content very quickly. But for us, actually, a lot of it is trying to poke at those edges that Trent was saying, is literally expanding what a player can do so that they don't feel as limited by the video game as much as possible. So, literally, as you used the example for hitting with the axe, like, I'm not kidding, but in the patch we're just about to announce, we're actually introducing new weapon actions, which are not necessarily that power scaled or anything, but it's actually to allow for the creativity that players would normally go, "Hey DM, can I like hit the player with the pommel of my sword, or can I try and trip them instead?" Without necessarily stepping on the battle master, which is obviously its own thing with the fighter class. We're trying to expand the realm of letting the player have that imagination and not, because so much of DMing is yes and it's a real cliched thing to say. But as much as possible, as DMs of this game, we're trying to create systems that allow the player to go, I want to do this, and then being incredibly surprised by the fact that they can. And
So
if
so
you look, go ahead.
oh no, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you look across the various games that we've been making, as we continue to go from strength to strength, our games are more and more allowing you to do things that go, holy crap, I can't believe I can do that.
So you think the biggest difference between what we could do in 1998 and what we can do now is the flexibility of the world, the improvisational nature that you can bring to it that we couldn't do
Well,
previously?
I wouldn't say it's fair to say that, like, because we're standing on the shoulders of giants a lot of the time. When developer games these days, it's not the same as it would have been back then. It's not the same technology or anything to the stretch, and also budget, time.
Mhm.
ability to iterate, all of that has changed dramatically over the last 10, 20 years. So it's not really fair to say that. What I would say though is just that it's for us, it's just a design philosophy. We do our best to create these worlds, even without necessarily messing around with weapon actions. We have a core design philosophy that's been in our game since DOS 1, and probably even before that, quite frankly. But it was really obvious as we were starting to develop the original Sin series, where we have this idea of the N+1 design. And it's so much designed to basically allow the player to play the game they want to play. So that sounds like an easy concept, but when you start talking to scripters about that, they look at you and go, "You're literally inviting me into hell." And Trent is smiling away because he knows what I'm talking about here. Because basically, if we have on a very simple level, if you have a door that you need to get through and it's locked, and there's a guard there, uh, there could be 7 or 8 different ways of solving that particular
Yeah.
small puzzle. As much as sneaking around and going through the window to smashing down the door to killing the guard or pickpocketing the guard or bribing the guard. And then imagine that with grander quests where you allow in your world for anybody to die and there is no invincible people, and all of that just becomes a thing where it explodes, and the amount of nuanced little decisions that could happen are quite many, and they're not going to be encountered by the majority of players. But it's hopefully those moments that the players go, "You're not going to believe what I did when I went into the magistrate camp and I talked to whoever." And so in
Yeah.
those experiences with BG3, they're just building on that type of development that we do. So it's not really, yeah, I wouldn't say it's a different, it's kind of just the way we've been developing over time and how we've got to ourselves now. We've got very systems based gameplay, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think,
So, oh,
sorry,
go
if I
ahead.
can't. One of the key things I think is just agency. The
Hmm.
Yes.
amount of agency you have as a player in the original Baldur's Gate is fairly limited because it was built for a 640 by 480 screen, and you're about
Yeah.
58 pixels tall. So the interactions and the fidelity that you can model those interactions with is actually fairly limited.
Hmm.
But new computer platforms, different viewports, 3D graphics, suddenly it starts to open up that accessibility and that interactivity. It's like when I think of Baldur's Gate, I think of it's kind of like an orchestra. You're sitting fairly far back and the overall effect is amazing. But you can't really make out those kind of individual details on what's going on because nobody's really rising to the forefront. Whereas I think what games do now is you've got a lot more games that are kind of going into these more focused areas. They're stripping the orchestra down. They're focusing on it. There's a solo over here. There's this over here. There's those moments. And when I think back, I mean, I'm going to tell you a secret. The reason you get involved in video games is you never want to grow up and you just want to keep your inner 12-year-old running on full sugar rush for the entire duration of your life. So
I
my
have
inner
no doubt.
12-year-old, yeah, my inner 12-year-old, I want to be running down the hallway with an axe, chopping down monsters and having a great time with that. And really that's where I want to go as a video game player, as a game. I'm not even a game designer anymore. I'm just kind of I'm this character that sits in the back with his robe on and says, more like this, less like that. Do this. Nope, nope, none of that, less of that. 12. Nope, nope. 10, 7. So it's kind of like being the emperor in Star Wars, I would imagine.
So kind of jumping off of that, let's talk a little bit about the future of technology, of the community of D&D. Obviously technology is playing a huge part now in what we do with tabletop. So things like streaming, crowdfunding. We've talked a little about streaming, but crowdfunding, online connectivity, AR. What do you think is coming for tabletop? What do you think is next for D&D culture and fandom with these things? And what's one thing you'd like to see happen in tabletop?
I think the potential here is madness. There's so many opportunities coming. Like we play with technology. That's just part of what we do. And we've got a complete setup for performance capture that's face, hands, body, the works. And we've got people running around doing all sorts of goofy things and we're pulling it in. When that starts to become consumer level tech and you start getting people, it's like, okay, I'm going to customize my 3D avatar and it's going to literally map to my face and
Mhm.
we're going to interact I think there's just so much opportunity there to become your character and to play your character. And on the video game side, technology, it just keeps getting better and better and better. And I think what you'll see studios taking narrower opportunities to go deeper. What's something that they really love about it? Oh, we love the storytelling and the interaction and multiplayer conversations and emotional stakes and dramatic moments and just pushing into that. Whereas on other fronts, I think of people going after like a strip down. It's like instead of a orchestra, what if it's White Stripes? It's three people or it's two people and instruments and that's it. And they're just going for it. And they just pick one aspect. It's like we're gonna make combat amazing. So this is the D&D style combat, fantasy combat we're just deep into it and it's fun and it's got agency and I just see so much opportunity and so much variety of what can be done. And but
Yeah.
from the video game side, RPGs are really hard to make. Really hard to make. Like anybody who decides I'm going to be an RPG developer, they should just slap themselves and get used to pain because that's the rest of their life. It's just pain after that. And you were talking earlier about what I refer to as combinatorial hell, which is when designers start designing a plot and it just starts to spider out and it creates this combinatorial hell where you need to somehow resolve all of those possible choices into a coherent thing that makes sense. And I feel so much pity for people who engineer those kind of things.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, but it's Kieran. I think you're having some connectivity issues. So
Yeah, I'm afraid I need to shoot, but I just want to say it's been a pleasure to be part of this. For me, I think the future of D&D and tabletop experiences in general is bright. I think throughout this time, in the pesky pandemic, as we like to say, it's actually been one of those things that have brought people together virtually. So it's actually become a great platform for that. So I hope that not just D&D and Wizards, but anybody making tabletop rule sets just are able to make it more accessible online for people so that they can use it. And there's more digital spaces to play, both physically digital, because I'm like you, Violet, where I want to play with my iPad, and also digitally online. But thank you very much for making me a part of the
thank you. And
panel.
before
And
you go, where can people find you if they want to keep up with your work?
oh, absolutely. So you can get us at Larian Studios on Twitter, at Larian Studios, and obviously on Twitch, Larian Studios as well. So when we're streaming our big PAX announcements and details there. And then if you're looking for me, I'm at Kernster at on Twitter as well.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much. Really
Thanks very
appreciate it.
much.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Um, yeah,
Oh,
please.
sorry. I wanted to answer your question about the future. Um, it's more I'm thinking from a community perspective.
Hmm.
I think like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when you thought about RPGs and D&D, it was just something that a certain group of developers put together and then they gave it to you, right? And that was it. That was kind of like, and DMs have always homebrewed, but they never really quite got to um change the rule set in like an official way.
Yes.
But now, we see things like the DMs Guild where creators can write stories and write rule sets and essentially allow other people to use the work that they're creating. I can just in a digital space, I know Fantasy Grounds just released something called the FG Forge. And it's not just for creators to share their work as far as like writers and artists, but also if people want to write things to like change the functionality of the program, we call it extensions, they can do that. And so I think both in the VTT space and in the creating space of like D&D and RPGs as a whole, I hope, because it seems like it's going that direction, um, you know, more and more people as a community can um, adapt and change it and be able to share it with people, um, versus it being this static thing that is in the book and that's it. So
Yeah, it
that's
feels
my
more
thought
like
on
it's
that.
become like it's gone from being sort of a lecture to a conversation, maybe.
Yes.
There's a
It's a
dialogue
living
happening.
thing.
Mhm.
It's a living thing versus I don't know. I would not have imagined trying to change the rules and share it with someone else when I started. But now it's like, oh, well, if I want to, I can just put it out there and it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually licensed some of the Baldur's Gate content to Fantasy Grounds, and you can grab like portraits and such and background art from Baldur's Gate and use it in Fantasy Grounds. So it's pretty cool. We met Doug down at Wizards of the Coast at one of the licensing summits. It was great, great time, great
Oh,
fellow to meet.
fantastic.
And on another front, with Neverwinter Nights, it's got a tool set built in so you can build your own adventures. And that's kind of what really excited me about the whole concept. I led the initial development of the product, and then I led it again at Beamdog here. But it was that idea of the democratization of game design and opening up the tools that everybody could get in there and change it. And like one of the things we did was to actually share all of our scripts on how we built all of our adventures, so people could open up our adventures and see how we did it. And the end result has been this huge community that's just run with it and taken the game, in some cases, places we could never imagine. And they'll come to us with a request. They're like, hey, can we add this? We're like, yes, we think you can add that. Matter of fact, let's figure out how to do that on the back end. Sometimes
I
the
love
requests
that.
are like, we can't do that. Nope, that will blow everything up. So let's avoid that.
On
But
that
most of the time,
idea, like I love that idea of the taking it from the community and being able to make those modifications. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I would love to go around and have everyone, let people know quickly where people can find you. Just and we will wrap this up.
so
So
I was the first person introed, so I'll be the first person outroed, I guess. Um, you can find me on Twitter at Trent Oster. I mostly say stupid things, and it has nothing to do with my company Beamdog. That's just me being an idiot. Um, on Twitter, our company is at Beamdog Inc. And on the World Wide Web, we're beamdog.com. And you can find our products on pretty much every store that you can imagine. Baldur's Gate 2, Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment, Neverwinter Nights, and recently Axis and Allies 1942 online.
awesome.
So as far as Fantasy Grounds, you can always just go to fantasygrounds.com and from there find their Twitter. They have a Facebook page. Um, I know that our social media manager has told me she's trying to get it into TikTok. So if you're into that, that's also out there. Um, for me personally, I'm on a bit of a social media break right now, but I do own a Twitter account. Can't really say how much I use it, but if you want to see it, it's at VVOLA. Uh, yeah.
You can find me and my work pretty much on Twitter is where I do everything. So that's at Mustangs Art, Patreon, Combat Wheelchair, Kofi, everything's linked there. And recommend that you check out some stuff that's come up because I've done some stuff with Pathfinder recently, but that's all recent tweets as well. So yeah, you can find pretty much everything that I do on there.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter as at DreamWisp. In my pinned tweet, you can find links to the Accessibility and Gaming Resource Guide, as well as the Disabled Pros in Tabletop directory, which has now more than 200 different disabled professionals working in tabletop over more than 40 different jobs. So if you'd like to sign up, you can do so through that link. Thank you all so much for coming and chatting about tabletop. It was such a delight to talk to all of you today. You all do such spectacular work, and the future of Dungeons and Dragons looks very bright, both online and offline. So thank you so much for being here. And to all of you who are spending time with us, thank you as well so much for being here and spending the time. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.